Good evening. Hope you're all doing well. Today we're starting with Maseches Nedarim Daf Memches. We're starting at Mem Zayin Amud Beis, 3 lines from the bottom at a new Mishnah. Some repetitive information, some new information. The Mishnah opens as follows. Hareini alecha cherem. If I make a comment about you and put you into cherem, hamudar asur, the one about whom the neder was said. So if I'm Phil and you're you, Phil says, Hareini alecha cherem, the cherem is on you, then you, the mudar, is asur. If I say instead, Hare at alai cherem, you are asur to me, so then, hanoder asur, then I who made the neder is going to be asur. Hareini alecha ve'at alai. If it's mutual, so then shneim asur, and both of us are asur to one another. However, in as much as it's true that the two of us would be asur to one another, there is one blanket heter. We'll see soon what ole bavel means. This will be included in the Mishnah itself in just a couple of lines. But things that are within that city will remain to be asur, and let's get into those two details. Ve'ezu davar, top of Memches Amud Aleph, second line down. Ve'ezu davar shel ole bavel. What are the items that are considered to be like part of ole bavel? Kigon har habayis v'ha'azaros v'habor shebe'emtza derech. Har habayis itself, the azaros, the sanctuaries, the rooms in which Jews belong, the Israelim for the Israelim v'chulei. A public bor, which we learned about extensively in Maseches Eruvin, which are in the middle of the path. What?
Which we all remember very nostalgic.
We used a different word, yeah. So the Gemara says all of these things, we can mutually benefit from them. What's the lamdus? They're all hefker. They belong broadly to the tzibur, but they really belong to no one. Masha Ein Kain says the Mishnah, Ve'ezu davar shel osayir. What are the things in the city that you're not allowed to both participate in? Says the Gemara, Kigon harichava, the road, I guess. I don't know if road's the right word. It's the open space. Ve'hamerchas, the bathhouse, the Beis HaKnesses, a shul. Ve'hateva. The Ran here writes what a teva is, 3 lines down. Teva shenos and aleha sefer Torah likros. It's a bima in our parlance. Other shitas say that it's the place that the Aron Kodesh is, the Aron Kodesh. Vehasvarim, and also books might not be able to be used because what's common with all of these things? They're not owned by nobody. They're owned by everybody. They're part of the tzibur. You go into a beis medrash. We all have a chelik in the beis medrash. And then the Gemara, the Mishnah quotes a cryptic line. Ve'akosev chelko lenasi. It seems in the Havamina. It seems that this piece of Mishnah is connected to the part of Ezu Derech Shel Osahir, and one who writes over their properties to the Nasi. We'll see soon what that means. It doesn't mean what we think it means. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Echad Kosev LeNasi v'Echad Kosev LeHadyot. It doesn't matter if you write your properties to the Nasi or to a regular person. And if so, why was the Nasi mentioned in the Mishnah? Ma ben Kosev LeNasi LeKosev LeHadyot. The only difference would be Shah Kosev LeNasi and Tzarech LeZakos. When a person writes over their properties to the Nasi, then there doesn't need to be a technical kinyan that takes place. But lehedyot tzarech lizkos. If somebody writes it to me or to one of us, we're all hedyotos, not in the disparaging kind of way, but just in the practical kind of way, in the halachic way. So tzarech lizkos, that requires a kinyan of sorts. The Chachamim Omrim, they argue with the Tanakama. Echad zeh ve'echad zeh tzrichen lizkos. No matter what, whether or not you're writing over your properties to the Nasi or to a Hedyot, you need to do some type of Ma'aseh Kinyan. Lo dibru b'Nasi ela b'Hoveh. It was just common in that culture. That's all. There's no halachic difference between them. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Ein Anshe Galil Tzrichen Liftov. We don't need to have anyone write away their properties or write off their properties to another person. Shekvar Kasu Avusein Al Yadein, because their ancestors wrote off their properties for them. Now, the whole second half of this Mishnah is hard to understand because we don't know what the line of Ve'akosev Chelko L'Nasi means. So the Gemara says, I don't understand. Amai mitzar. Why did you put the language of Ve'akosev Chelko L'Nasi in the list of things that are usher? If I write off my properties to somebody else, why then would you say that they remain usher? Is it when we're mudar hana from one another? Because the Mishnah painted the case. If there's shneim that are asur to one another, so then some things are mutar, which is ole bavel stuff, all hefker, and some things are asur, which is all partnership owned. But what is this line in the Mishnah of Ve'akosev Chelko L'Nasi? So the Gemara responds, Amar Rav Sheshes, third of the way down, Memches Amud Aleph, Hachiktani. Really, our Mishnah should have had in the words, Uma Takanasan. How can one get out of a scenario of Isser Hana? If you and I have a mutual Isser Hana, but I have things that I need to do, how do we get out of it? The Gemara says, Yichtavu Chelkan L'Nasi. The Gemara was giving a solution. The Gemara was telling us, here's what you should do if you're stuck, and therefore That is what the line means. So if we were to look back in our Mishnah, what we would need to do is as follows. Let's read 3 lines from the top of the page. Next line. Umata kanasan. What should we do? Yichtov chelko l'nasi. That's how we should be reading our Mishnah. And now if you look back in the Gemara, a third of the way down, you'll see there's 5 lines, 6 lines almost of parentheses. And we're actually going to skip all of it because it's pretty much a direct quote from our Mishnah. And the Mishnah, the Gemara continues halfway down on the page at the 2 dots. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Einan shegalot tzrichin lizkos. We had said that if people were from Galil, they didn't have to do any maisa for kinyanim. Shekvar kasva v'osei al yadei, and that was already taken care of by their ancestors. What's going on here? The Gemara says that there's a brayso Tanya. Rabbi Yehuda Omer, Anshe Galil kantarin hayu. These people were very difficult people. They were jerks. They were so belligerent, constantly being answering on one another. And when they were answering on one another, they did it all the time. And because they did it all the time, that meant that people were super limited in what they could do. Because even if you have an Isser Hana with one person, you can't even walk down the same street as them because there's a piece of a chelik of ownership in all of it. See, we didn't even discuss this in all the previous cases of being Mudar Hana between 2 people. But Lamaisa, anything that's co-owned is off limits. Right? What about Breira? The sugya should be a raya for the shita of Lesle Breira. Because this Gemara doesn't even talk about it. It just assumes blanketly that you're not allowed to join, and this also plays into the shita that the Ran quoted, that we don't necessarily hold like Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov. That Mishnah that we learned about, where there were a few cases of yesh breira versus ein breira, our Gemara concluded that it was that we passed like Rabbi Elazar ben Yaakov that there's yesh breira. But I had mentioned at that time that the Ran was of the opinion that other Rishonim were of the opinion that ein breira, and this Gemara is a raya brura, seemingly a raya brura for that. So now the Gemara says they kept doing this to each other. They were like, I forbid you from this. No, I forbid you from this. Back and forth, little children, little toddlers. So the Gemara says, Amdu abusein v'kasvu chelkehen l'nasi. Sorry, children, I'm intervening now. You can't do this anymore. You have no properties anymore. Now, what does this even mean halachically? Can the Bezdin come in and say your properties aren't yours? Maybe what the Gemara means is that we're talking about the public properties, that you think you own. You're a chelak in that, you're going to be giving over to the nasi. So therefore you can walk down the street because he can. And that would solve some of the technical problems. That brings us to a new Mishnah, a Mishnah that we're familiar with. We've learned, I believe, each piece of this Mishnah somewhere previously in this Masechta. 2/3 of the way down, Memches Medala. The Mishnah writes, if a person, Ruvain says to Shimon, Ruvain has the food, Shimon has an Isser Hana, he's not allowed to benefit from Ruvain, what should he do? So he said, Ruvain can give it to Levi, and Levi can give it to Shimon, no problem, no problem at all. And now, let's just think about what just happened. Ruvain can give to Levi, and then Shimon can eat from Levi, right? Maisa says the Gemara, this was the story of Beis Choron that was referenced in the Gemara a couple of days ago. With the wedding, yeah, big family politics. Every wedding has politics. This is bad. When your father has an Isser Hana, it's not Kishma.
Other level.
Yeah, it's on another level. P.S. Who pays for the weddings? I'm just like you got to pick the people to have an Isser Hana. You have a question?
It could have been like
For Talmud Torah. Yeah, I'm learning your brain a little bit, just a little. I'm starting to understand you a little bit. Because this was actually the reverse, where the father wasn't allowed to get Hana from the kid. So we have Ruvain, Shimon, and Levi. Ruvain is the grandfather generation, Shimon is the father generation, and Levi is the grandchild generation. So here's what we have. Ruvain's the grandfather. He's not allowed to get Hana from Shimon, Labrius, and Shimon's son Levi is getting married, and Levi wants his grandfather to be at the wedding. But Ruvain is the grandfather. He's Asr B'Hana from Shimon. Shimon paid for all the food at the wedding. So he's not allowed to have his grandfather at the wedding because his grandfather can't benefit from his father. So says the Gemara, by Hamasi Espino, there was a big family wedding. But Amar Lechavero, so Shimon, who was the father of the groom, says to his best friend Chaim, he says, I'm giving you everything. I'm giving you everything so that my father can come to the wedding, and that way he can have Hana. Same. What do you mean it became an issue after the fact?
Once the guy that had the property said, I'm doing this making a head. I mean, I said, no,
oh, that's the rest of this Mishnah. That's this Mishnah.
Yeah. I'm saying this specific language up front, and he said, I'm doing this because.
Yeah. So our Mishnah is explicitly speaking about this because Rava is going to have two pshatim in how to understand this language. So the previous cases, it was left out. It just it was hinting to this Mishnah as though we would have known it, which we didn't. But that's what the Gemara was doing. So let's learn the rest of the Mishnah. We'll see all of the details here. So that's what he said. Amar im shalihem. Oh, sorry, I think I skipped a line. No, I didn't. All right. Amar im shalihem. The Chaim, the friend, says to his friend Shimon, if in fact they're mine, harem mukdash l'shamayim. Goodbye. I know you spent $50,000 on the wedding, $100 a plate, but I'm sorry, I'm giving it all to Hektish. Amar le, Shimon says back to Chaim, nosati loch es shali she takdishem l'shamayim. Did I give you my items? Now we can already see the question that's percolating here, which is, was this a real kinyan in the first place? Because you can't put a t'nai on what somebody does with the item that you gave him. That's not, especially not after the fact, right? So says the Gemara, I didn't give it to you for Shamayim, last of the short lines. Amar lo, nasata li shelcha el shatei atav avicha ochlin v'shosin u'misratzin zelazeh v'hei avon talui barosho. This guy Chaim says, yeah, you've caused me a massive headache. I don't want to get involved in your crazy family politics. I'm giving this to Hektish. I don't want your father showing up and I really don't actually own this item. You really own the item. And I was just the arbiter for bad news. And all of a sudden I'm the bad guy in the end of all of this. So the Gemara says, Amru Chachamim, and this is dropping the gavel. Kol matana she'ena, any gift that is not in the category of that if I want to sanctify it, I can sanctify it. If that's not the parameters of this sale, eina matana. Let me say that out in our case. Shimon gave over the wedding hall and all of the contents of the wedding hall to Chaim to enable Ruvain to come to the wedding. If Shimon's transfer of those things wasn't so complete, such that Chaim has the power to give it over to Hektish, not a kinyan. Really? Chaim was right. Chaim says, don't put me in this situation. I'm being makdish everything with Shamayim. It was like the litmus test of how good of a kinyan this was. But he was right because it doesn't work. And if he would have held on to it, and he just would have been the go-between for an Aveira, because Ruvain was not allowed to come to that wedding, even if he sold it to Chaim. Because how did Shimon want to sell it to Chaim? I'm giving it to you. I'll tonight that you do exactly what I want with it. That's not a kinyan. That's the conclusion of our Mishnah. It's
not a kinyan. So the Mafreya, it's not. He can't.
Ruvain can't come to the wedding.
Grandfather.
Ruvain, the grandfather, can't come to the
He
wedding.
also can't be makrish.
Who?
Whoever.
Oh, Chaim. Yeah. No.
Because it's not
his.
Really his, right?
Right. And that's why the Gemara opens with this question. My solistor. The first part of the Mishnah, what did the first part of the Mishnah teach us? That Ruvain can give the food to Levi to give it to Shimon. And then you told me a story that Shimon cannot give everything over to Chaim in order to enable Ruvain to come to the wedding. So why would you bring a story that's the exact opposite of the point that you just made? My solistor. Pay attention. The Resha taught us something exactly the opposite. Now you're telling me this whole Maisa that we've seen 5 times already, this Masechta, it's not even a match to the Resha of the Mishnah. Because we said that Shimon, who has an Isser Hanoah from Ruvain, can benefit from the food. Ruvain has to give it to Levi first. What do you mean? Kol matana, any gift that's not bitznai, that I can be makdish it myself, it's not a gift. The only reason Ruvain was giving up the food to Levi was so Shimon can eat. Same as our Mishnah, but that's my solistor. So it says the Gemara, you're 100% correct. And the first time I learned this Mishnah, I completely missed the fact that the story was the exact opposite of the ratio, which means I wasn't paying attention. And the Gemara says, my solistor, what should we do? Really, this is the following text of our Mishnah. In regards to the ratio of our Mishnah, when Ruvain gave food to Levi to enable Shimon to eat, but if the way that things played out, it didn't pass the smell test, where everybody knew that Ruvain was just giving it over to Levi just so Shimon can eat, then Aser. Want a beautiful story about that? Says the Gemara. So beautiful. So now the Gemara is telling us it really depends on the kinyan itself. If the kinyan is being done in a way where it's clear to everyone who's watching that it's a ha'arama, then the kinyan is not a kinyan. Everybody knows what's going on. Everybody knows there's a whole drama. Why is Chaim's name on the wedding hall, like on the screen there? Chaim's wedding. It's not Chaim's wedding. It's Shimon's wedding because he's the guy who swiped the credit card. He's not, nothing. It's a zero. It doesn't. The whole thing doesn't count. The whole thing is Sofo was mochiach al tchilaso, and therefore the whole thing is bata. And that brings us to Rava. Rava has two different understandings of when this kinyan does not work. Omar Rava, 5 lines from the bottom. Lo shanu, that this matana does not work. Elada Amar le, when Shimon says to Chaim, very explicit. The only reason I'm giving this to you is because I want you to enable my father to come to my son's wedding. Aval Amar.
Why doesn't he just?
Aval, hold on one second. Aval Amar le shilu fanecha shiavo abba. If you say it less specifically, it's not kidei shiavo abba, but sheyuhu lefanecha shiavo abba. At least now it's possible. So then maybe midait chuda amar le. Maybe that's already in another machaneh. Then we can say that that's mutter for Reuven to come to that wedding. That's language number one. Sorry, Michael, we're just in the middle of a thought. What'd you say?
Why doesn't he just revoke the Neder?
Yeah, the Gemara is clearly that he wouldn't or couldn't or didn't. That you're asking a question that would undo the whole Mishnah, right? The Mishnah is dealing with a case where we have this or no. It's like in geometry, they have givens. This is one of the givens. You're right. You could restructure the case, but then it wouldn't be our Mishnah anymore. Our Mishnah wants to know, our Mishnah is really about kinyanim. It just happens to interface with the Sugya and the Nedarim. When I give this over, in my mind, I have this Tanai of giving it over. Is that a kinyan or is it not a kinyan? So if you change that one feature, and of course you're right, if you change that feature, it would solve the problem, and then we couldn't learn the Mishnah because it would make no sense. So you're asking the right question. It's the right question, but we need it to be this way. So that's version number one of Rava's understanding of our Mishnah. And 3 lines from the bottom, put on your thinking caps. Lishna charina amrin la. Really, Rava had a different language. Omar Rava, lo tema. Don't say that taima, the reason why this wasn't a matana was the amar le v'hina lefanecha the aser. That here, I want to make sure that this is all in front of you. Aval amar le hein lefanecha sheyavo abba v'yochal mutter. Don't say that. That's why that had it been that it was a looser language, it would even be mutter, unlike version number one. Ella afilu amar le hein lefanecha yavo abba v'yochal. Even if it was that way, aser. Even if it was the looser language, it's still going to be aser. My taima sudasa mukchas alav. Because at the end of the day, version number one of Rava does not take into account the fact that everybody knows what's going on here. Everybody sees what's happening. The second Reuven walks into the wedding, everybody knows there was a harama, the kinyan is a 0. Option number one of Rava gave us latitude in the language. It told us that if you weren't specific about your condition when Shimon gives over the Suda to Chaim, if you weren't specific, okay, a little bit of room. Says the second version of Rava, no way. It doesn't work. Why? Because Sudasa Mukhasalam. Clear so far. Good. Turning to the top of Mem Chesed base, of course, we'll be stopping at the bottom of the page. Finishing yet another parak. The Gemara says, Hahu Gavra, there was a man, Dahavale Bira, he had a son, to have a Shamit Kipe de Kitna. He would steal rolls of flax. He was a thief, pulling them off of the back of trucks. And the father, being the parent that he was, Asrinhu lenichse ale. He made a neder, you're a thief, you cannot have anything that I give you. Okay? Amrulay, they said back to the father, that's very nice that you just cut off your child from your estate. But what happens if the following is true? What about your son, V'ihava bar Baruch? If this guy's son, so Reuven is the father, Shimon is the thief, and Levi is Shimon's son. What would happen if Levi bar Baruch tzurma merabanan mai? How would you feel, Reuven? You just asked your son Shimon from all of your properties. What if Shimon's son Levi all of a sudden is a Grois Talmud Chacham? How do you feel now about answering him from your properties? Because you just made a neder against him. So says the Gemara, what would the din be? Omar le, what?
It's the grandson that became the.
It's a grandson, correct.
So if he's madir against his son, it's two different people.
So says the Gemara, Omar lahon, Shimon, who's the father of Shimon is the thief. So they said to Reuven, Reuven says back to them, Amar lahon, he says, Likni hadain, I'll let the middle guy take it. I don't want my grandson to not have my Yerusha through my son. He can't give a proper halachic Yerusha to the grandson. It has to go to his son first. So the only way that the $1 million in his Yerusha, of Reuven's Yerusha, is going to get to Levi is through Shimon. So Reuven argues, Likne hadain, I'll let the thief hold on to them. And then, V'ihava barbare tzurme rabbanon, and if in fact down the road, my thief, my son who is a thief, that his child is a Talmud Chacham, then that son can be kona the money. This is conditions upon conditions that Ruvain is putting on his inheritance money of $1 million. Ruvain's inheritance money is $1 million. He tried to ask Shimon from the estate, and then they said to him, "What if Shimon's kid is going to be a Talmud Chacham?" He said, "Don't worry, fine. I'll put some conditions into my Yerusha, no problem." Says the Gemara, "Mai, what's the din?" This is a machlokes. Amre Pumpadisai, the people of Pumpadisa would say, that's kani al manas lahaknosu. That's a kinyan which is conditional. V'chol kani al manas lahaknos. Any kinyan that happens now, which is really only a lead up to a later kinyan, lo kani. That's what the people in Pumpadisa would say. And therefore, in this case, Reuven wants to take his $1 million, be makna that to Shimon on the condition that it will then be a kinyan for his son Levi. No dice. Doesn't work. The mechanics don't work.
Why can't you just go straight to the grandson?
It just wouldn't be a Yerusha. He has an obligation to his kid. He could forego the money, but just like to Michael's question, the case is not that case. You're right. He could have done that. He could have given him the money.
But didn't have to wait for it to be Yerusha. You just handed it to him.
But then it wouldn't be a Yerusha. But the question here is the way the Gemara was structured was that Ruvain said, "I'm asering Shimon," and they made it a Yerusha case. That's what the Gemara was established as a Yerusha case.
If you're giving the money to somebody who's an avowed thief, you know the grandson isn't going to get it anyway.
Okay. Maybe he only steals. He's a kleptomaniac for flax only. There are people like that, Some people like Michael's car. They don't like my car. You just gotta.
So
Come on, that was pretty good. Come on.
Thank
Come on.
you.
You're welcome.
he wouldn't be happy with the way we keep our slogan.
My high.
Because back in the day, they used to be in flax. He used to wrap it up in flax. Now
Oh, the horsehair?
yeah,
Was that flax?
that was flax. Yeah.
They said horsehair when I was a kid. I always believed it. For sure wasn't horsehair. Who cuts horsehairs to wrap up a? Did you hear that also? The horsehair. Sheker v'chazav. Our whole childhood is being uprooted. So that's answer number one. Rav Nachman didn't agree. 6 lines down, 7 lines down. But Rav Nachman, Mem Ches Mid Beis, 7 lines down. But Rav Nachman Omar, no, kani. He says that this kinyan works. Why? Because the kinyan that Ruvain makes through Shimon for the sake of Levi is the ha sudra kani al manas lahaknosu. It's no different than a kinyan sudar. We know that at weddings and at other case scenarios, we do some type of activity with a third party item to make the first party item be moved from one person to the next. Erev Shabbos, this happens all the time in Makor on the weekend of a bar mitzvah. Rabbi Robinson will come over to someone and say, "Please be makna this on behalf of somebody else." You don't have to pick up the book. You can do kinyan siddur. You can do the same exact thing. So kinyan siddur works. So he says our flow of events of Ruvain to Shimon to Levi is a kinyan siddur type of model, and it should be mutter. Amar Rav Ashi, this does not work. After all, a kinyan siddur always gets returned, right? The kinyan siddur, the item itself, gets returned back to the original owner. And I remember Rabbi Matenki was Masada Kedushin at my wedding, and he had a very expensive, looked expensive at the time. I presume it was a very chashuv ballpoint pen. He always carries one with him. So when someone does a kinyan siddur, they're like, "Thank you very much. I did my kinyan siddur. Have a nice day. Sayonara. Say goodbye." That's what the Gemara asks. Amar Rav Ashi, Uman lemalan de sudra itafis le lo matfis. Who says that the sudar was really a third party item? Maybe that was a kinyan mamish, and he kept it. That's number one. Sudra kani al manas lahaknos with kani min hashta. When it comes to a kinyan sudar, that's kani al manas lahaknos with kani min hashta. That kinyan takes place right now. But in the case of our wayward Shimon and his Talmud Chacham son, Halein Nichsin de Hadein, when it comes to our case, Leimas Kani, when would it be that the kinyan that Ruvain is trying to make would take place? You're comparing apples and oranges. The case of the kinyan sudar, Rav Nachman, that you wanted to bring, was it Rav Nachman? Yeah. Rav Nachman wants to say this is similar to a case of kinyan sudar. What do you mean kinyan sudar? Kinyan sudar is an immediate transaction, but the transaction that we're discussing is not immediate. It's dependent on the future of whether or not Levi will become a Talmud Chacham. So the Gemara says these cases are not comparable. When will this work out? Lichihava hadar sudra lamari. It says the Gemara that right after this transaction takes place, he gives back the sudar. The kinyan's over. So these cases are not comparable. Rav Nachman, another statement against Rav Nachman. Look at our Mishnah. Look at our Mishnah. Now we know why this Gemara is being brought here. What did our Mishnah say? Shimon gave all of the items of the wedding over to Chaim in order to enable that Reuven should come to the wedding. And what do we say as a conclusion? 0. So Kani al manas lahaknos doesn't work. So the Gemara gives a couple of quick responses. Zimnin Omar le mishum deseudasa mukchas alav. Sometimes he would say that case might be a little different because it's what's going on with the Suda. We just see like Reuben came in, everybody knows what's going on. Zimnin Omar le. Sometimes he would give the following answer. Rav Nachman would say, really it's Rabbi Eliezer. He to Amar afilu vitor aser b'mudar hana. Even Vitor, which we learned about in an earlier place in Shas, here in this Masechta, even Vitor, overlooking something is going to be Aser Behana, and here too, in our case, this type of kinyan would be glossed over. And lastly, for the sake of this parak, Tanan Amru Chachamim Kol Matana, if there's any gift she'ena which is not within the parameters of she'im hikdisha te mekudeshes, that if when Shimon gives over all the food to Chaim that he's not able to be mekudash ena matana. So what does it mean kol matana? We always say kol asuye mai. What is the language of kol coming to teach us? Says the Gemara, lav le asuye hamilsa deshaja bekipi. Aren't we talking about the case of the flax thief, that it should not be a good kinyan? That should be the kol. Says the Gemara, not necessarily low. Maybe it's la'asuye lishna ba'asra deshmaise de Rava. Maybe it's coming to include the language of Rava, which was found on the second language of Rava, that it's completely usher, even with the loose language of Shimon to Chaim, just in the event that you want to invite my father, in the event. So those are the possibilities, and the Gemara says that that's what we would be included in kol la'asuye mai when we say kol matana. Hadron alacha shutfin baruch Hashem. We finished another parak in Shas. We should come back to this daf in 7.5 years. Wishing you all a beautiful night. We'll pick up again tomorrow night with daf Mem Tes in person. Wednesday and Thursday, I'm out of town. On both days, I'll be posting at some point throughout the day. Emir Hashem. We'll figure it out. Have a good night.
Within